Moto is back with a new foldable phone, the Motorola Razr 2022, and this year they're aiming to deliver a flagship-grade experience in line with Samsung's Galaxy Z Flip series. Foldables have been around for a while, but there still aren't that many to choose from, so could the Moto Razr 2022 be a contender for the top dog? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our full review. The Moto Razr 2022 is a flagship phone with a compact clamshell form factor, akin to Samsung's Galaxy Z Flip 4 and Huawei's P50 Pocket. It's a big change from the previous model, the Moto Razr 5G, which was more of a mid-range device. Now you get things like a high-end chipset, a high refresh rate on the foldable display, and stereo speakers. The design has changed a lot too. Rather than having the signature Moto Razr chin at the bottom, the phone looks very similar to the Z Flip 4. The stainless steel hinge has been redesigned. It's tight when folded and yet easy to open. And while open, it's sturdy enough to stay open at almost any angle. The display crease is another area where Motorola did a great job. It's quite subtle and hardly noticeable either to the eye or to the touch. In terms of the rest of the design, you get Gorilla Glass 5 on the glossy top cover, and finely textured matte finish on the lower half. This color, called Satin Black, is the only one available. The middle frame is made of 7000 series aluminum, which adds some extra durability. And the Razr 2022 is wider than most flip devices, and the inner display is taller than the previous model. Although that means it's not as compact, it's nice to have this larger display area. Motorola claims that the phone has a water-repellent design, and that's rated at IP52. That is less water-resistant than the Z Flip 4, which has IPX8, but the dust protection might be better here. Let's talk more about the inner display. It's a 6.7-inch foldable AMOLED panel with a 1080p resolution and an extra fast 144Hz refresh rate. The refresh rate is a little bit misleading. In the auto mode, you'll get 90Hz when swiping around at a lower brightness level. And this goes up to 120Hz only at higher brightness. We saw it dial down to 60Hz when you stop interacting with it to save energy, but that's as low as it would go. The 144Hz is meant exclusively for gaming, and the only way to activate it is through the Moto Games Launcher, on a per-game basis. The Moto Razr 2022's display is quite nice to watch your content on. It's sharp enough and contrasty, and the color accuracy is great. There's also support for 10-bit color and HDR10+, and you get a Widevine L1 DRM certification for high-res streaming. The brightness performance of this panel is quite competitive too. We measured just shy of 500 nits maximum with a manual slider, and this can boost to over 1000 nits in auto mode when in bright conditions. The external display isn't as bright, at a maximum of 370 nits, so it might not be so easy to use outdoors, especially with its glossy finish. Still, this display is pretty neat. It's a 2.7-inch AMOLED panel with a 573 by 800 resolution, and a 60Hz refresh rate. It supports an always-on function, as well as apps and widgets, which you swipe through on a carousel. A lot of apps are actually usable on it, despite the odd aspect ratio. You also get per-app settings to manage their behavior, like whether or not they will transition to the inner screen when you open up the phone. As an upgrade to the previous model, the Moto Razr 2022 has a pair of stereo speakers, with the earpiece doubling as the second speaker. They earned a very good score on our loudness charts, and the quality is solid, with good mids, clean vocals, and even some bass. For biometrics, you get a side-mounted fingerprint reader which doubles as the power button. It's quick and accurate. Storage isn't expandable on the phone, but it does come with 256 gigs on board. The Motorola Razr 2022's interface is something very close to stock Android 12, with just a few in-house customizations on top. One of those specific to this phone are the interactive wallpapers. These are made to animate when you open and close the foldable screen. Besides that, there aren't many unique features taking advantage of the form factor. Some apps are able to split the UI to both halves of the phone, but there's not much else beyond that. The rest of the custom features are the same as you'd find on other recent Moto phones, and they're organized conveniently into the Moto app. These include custom gestures, personalizations, and gaming options. This phone also supports Moto's Ready For platform, which allows you to connect the phone to a monitor or TV and even a mouse and keyboard. The Motorola Razr 2022 packs the most powerful Qualcomm chipset you can get right now, the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. It's quite a jump from the Snapdragon 765G in the previous model. As you'd expect, the performance here is excellent, both in CPU and GPU tasks. But with that said, the Razr does fall a bit behind other flagships with the same silicon, presumably because the cooling potential here is limited by the phone's specific form factor. Our prolonged stress test confirmed that the phone does get toasty under heavy loads, and we measured substantial thermal throttling. But this is often the case with high-powered flagships anyway. The Moto Razr 2022 has a 3500 mAh battery capacity, and battery life is not its strong suit. The phone was able to score an endurance rating of just 64 hours in our proprietary tests. This is along the lines of other small foldables though. The phone does come with a 30-watt charger in the box, but charging speed is actually on the slow side, considering the smallish battery. The Razr 2022 charged from 0 to just 37% in half an hour. There's no wireless charging like you'd find on the Z Flip. Now onto the cameras. There are two on the backside, a 50-megapixel main cam with OIS, and a 13-megapixel ultra-wide cam with autofocus. It is possible to use the cameras while the phone is folded, but there's an issue. You'd be holding the cameras vertically this way. Rather than your photos and videos all coming out in portrait orientation, they end up cropped to match what you see on the viewfinder. In daylight, the Razr 2022 captures pretty good 12.5-megapixel images. There's plenty of detail with a nicely natural rendition of foliage. The look is a bit too expressive though, even over the top. The contrast is dialed up pretty high, which affects the dynamic range, and the colors can be quite vibrant. There is some visible noise too. The portrait mode uses the main cam and does a fair job of separating your subject from the background, but we found the amount of blur in the background to be a bit excessive. Something unique here is that when you shoot someone, the phone can give an animated prompt to smile on the external screen, or otherwise the subject can see themselves with a preview. The ultra-wide camera delivers okay results. Its images aren't that wide, and they are a little on the soft side. The colors don't match the main cameras, which isn't great, but at least they're dialed back a bit. The contrast is still too much though. Since the ultra-wide supports autofocus, you can take close-up macro shots with it. The macro mode also applies some digital zoom on top. Still, the results are good in terms of detail and sharpness. If the light is low enough, the Moto Razr 2022 can automatically apply its night vision processing to photos from the main cam. These are competitive, with nice detail, low noise, bright yet balanced exposure, and good dynamic range. The colors hold up well too. Without the night vision, you'll be looking at softer and noisier shots, with less detail in the shadows and narrower dynamic range. The ultra-wide's behavior is the same as the main cams at night. The auto night vision will kick in, and the resulting photos have a good amount of detail, good dynamic range, and a likable color rendition. They're still fairly noisy though. Without night vision, you'll get darker images with a narrow dynamic range. Here on the Moto Razr, you can make three types of selfies. Those shot in the standard way with the 32-megapixel cam in the inner screen, those taken with the rear cameras with the phone open using the external screen as a viewfinder, and those taken with the same cameras but while the phone is folded. This method brings out the issue I mentioned before with the aspect ratio. The photos from the inner selfie cam are saved at 8 megapixels, and they have a good level of detail, but the white balance can sometimes be off. And as you'd expect, these aren't as sharp as the selfies you get from the rear cam. Selfies from the main rear camera look good, with nice exposure, likable yet saturated skin tones, and high contrast. Portrait selfies from the main cam get you the same excessive blur level we got when shooting standard portraits. And here's what it looks like if you shoot with the main cam while the phone is folded. The image has a different aspect ratio and the processing is different too, with toned down color saturation. Being able to capture ultra-wide selfies is quite nice if you need to get more people into the frame. If you shoot with the phone folded, the crop means that the ultra-wide is actually not that much wider than the main cam. The Moto Razr 2022 can record video in up to 8K at 30 FPS with the main camera. The 8K footage is above average in terms of detail, and you get the full field of view. If you're shooting in 4K with the main cam, you get a cropped-in field of view. There's plenty of detail, but like the stills, you get an excessively contrasty and oversaturated look. If you try recording video while the phone is folded, you're limited to 1080p resolution. The ultra-wide's 4K videos have a pretty good amount of detail, but again, as in stills, there's a visible difference in the color presentation, and it seems a bit off. There's too much contrast too, and the dynamic range is below average. So that's the Moto Razr 2022. It's a solid foldable phone and a commendable improvement over the previous model, with a refined design and hinge, and major upgrades when it comes to the chipset, the display, and the speakers. There are some issues that come with the territory. The battery life and charging speed are much less than you'd get from a standard, non-foldable smartphone, and the chipset tends to get toasty. But the main thing holding the Razr back is the price. It's 1,200 euros at launch. That's about par for the course. The Flip 4 launched for 1,100 and the P50 Pocket was 1,300. But those phones have been out for a while now and have already gotten a lot cheaper to buy. And since the quality of the features is pretty similar, at the moment it's hard to justify going for the Moto instead. In the end, the Moto Razr 2022 is a good showing and is a nice step forward for Motorola. It's just that right now the price tag is a tough pill to swallow. Thanks for watching guys, and see you on the next one.